Commander Vextal stood on the bridge of his massive warship, staring at the glowing screens that showed his next target. For 20 years, he had led the Dominion's warfleet across the galaxy, destroying everything in their path.
12 entire
Worlds had fallen to his ships. Billions of lives snuffed out like candles in a storm. Not once had he lost even a single vessel from his fleet. The reptilian commander's yellow eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he studied the readings. Another human colony ship limped through space ahead of them, its engines sputtering and failing. Thick black smoke poured from damaged sections of the hull. The ship looked like a dying whale, helpless and alone in the vast darkness between stars. "Sir, we're getting full sensor readings on the target," reported Lieutenant Crix from the tactical station. The young officer's scales were still bright green, marking him as inexperienced. He had only joined the fleet after their last conquest. The human vessel shows minimal defensive capabilities. Just a few small plasma cannons, probably meant for asteroid mining rather than combat. Their shields are operating at less than 30% power. Vextal's claws scraped against the armrest of his command throne, making a sound like knives. On stone, the throne itself was carved from the bones of his enemies, a reminder of his countless victories. Round the bridge, dozens of crew members worked at their stations, their movements precise and efficient. They had done this dance of death many times before. "How many of the vermin are aboard?" Vextal asked, though he already knew the answer would please him. More humans meant more fear, more suffering. The Dominion fed on terror like plants fed. On sunlight? "Approximately 45,000 refugees, Commander," Crix replied, consulting his instruments. "Men, women, and children, fleeing from the Kepler colony before we arrived to cleanse it last month. They've been traveling for weeks, probably running low on food and medical supplies." The commander's mandibles clicked together in what passed for laughter among his species. These pathetic humans thought they could escape the inevitable. They scattered across the galaxy like insects, building their little settlements on worthless rocks and moons. But there was nowhere to run from the Dominion's justice. Standard extermination protocol then, Vextal decided, settling back into his throne. "Target their engines first. Let them drift helplessly while we charge our main weapons. I want them to have time to think about their fate. Fear makes the final moments so much sweeter." The war fleet consisted of 200 vessels of various sizes, from massive dreadnoughts bristling with weapons to smaller destroyers that could hunt down fleeing survivors. Each ship was painted in the deep purple colors of the Dominion, with golden symbols marking their many victories. The fleet moved through space like a pack of predators, organized and deadly. For generations, the Dominion had brought order to the chaotic galaxy. Weak species were eliminated, their worlds claimed for the greater good. Resources that had been wasted by inferior civilizations were put to proper use. It was not cruelty, Vextal told himself. It was evolution in action. Human colony ship ahead of them was called the New Dawn, though there would be no dawn for its passengers today. Through the bridge's main view screen, Vextal could see the vessel growing larger as they approached. Its hull was scarred and patched, showing signs of hasty repairs made during their desperate flight, probably to save weight and power. The humans were already abandoning their weakest members. "All ships assume attack formation," Vextal commanded into his communications array. "Prepare to engage on my signal. Remember, we want this to be visible to any other human colonies monitoring long-range sensors. Let them see what happens to those who dare to spread their plague across our galaxy." But as the war fleet moved into position, something impossible happened. Space itself seemed to ripple and tear, like fabric being cut by an invisible blade. From the tear in reality, something emerged that made Vextal's blood turn to ice in his veins. A ship appeared where nothing had been moments before. But calling it a ship hardly seemed adequate. It was something far beyond anything in the Dominions, databases, or even their nightmares. The vessel's hull was darker than the space around it, seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. Looking at it was like staring into the depths of a bottomless pit. The craft's shape defied easy description. Angular sections jutted out at impossible angles, covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Bextel found his eyes watering as he tried to focus on the details. The patterns seemed to shift and change when viewed peripherally, creating an optical illusion that made his head spin. But most terrifying of all were the weapon arrays. Dozens of them lined the hull, each one humming with barely contained energy. Power readings spiked across every sensor on the Dominion fleet as the mysterious vessel simply existed in space near them. It wasn't doing anything threatening. It wasn't powering weapons or raising shields. It was just there, floating motionless, like a monument to destruction. "What in the name of the dark void is that thing?" Vextel whispered, his voice barely audible over the sudden alarms blaring across his bridge. Lieutenant Crix frantically worked at his console, sweat beading on his scaled forehead despite the cool temperature maintained on the bridge. "I'm running full sensor sweeps, Commander, but nothing matches our databases. The energy signatures are completely unknown. The whole material doesn't correspond to anything we've encountered before. It's like it's made from compressed starlight or something equally impossible." The science officer, an elderly female named Dr. Silthan, looked up from her station with fear in her ancient eyes. "Sir, I'm detecting quantum fluctuations around the vessel that shouldn't be possible. It's as if it's existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Our sensors keep getting contradictory readings." Vextel felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: genuine terror.
Ow!
In all his conquests, facing dozens of different species and their technologies, he had never encountered anything that simply radiated menace by existing. The mysterious ship hung in space like a predator watching its prey, and for the first time in his military career, Commander Vextel realized he might be the prey. The human colony ship continued its limping journey, unaware of either the Dominion fleet preparing to destroy it or the Dark Guardian that had somehow appeared to watch over the proceedings. In the cold vacuum of space, 3 different fates hung in the balance, and only one would survive what was about to unfold. Captain Lee Tommen sat perfectly still in his command chair, watching the alien fleet through the advanced holographic displays that surrounded him. The bridge of the Retribution was unlike anything humanity had ever built before. Smooth walls curved seamlessly into the ceiling, glowing with soft blue light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. No harsh angles or crude metal panels like the old warships. Everything was organic, flowing, almost alive. Tay-Min had volunteered for this mission, knowing he might never return home. The Retribution was humanity's first attempt at building a ship that could think for itself, make decisions faster than any human mind could process. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like holding a loaded weapon that could turn on you at any moment. The ship's artificial intelligence had been given the designation Aria, though Taman often wondered if it had chosen a different name for itself. Aria had been analyzing the massive alien fleet for less than half a minute. But in computer terms, that was like spending years studying every detail of the enemy formation. "Analysis complete, Captain," Aria announced through speakers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Her voice was perfectly human, with just a hint of something else underneath. Something that reminded Taman that he was talking to a mind that could process information millions of times faster than his own. Enemy composition identified: 47 battlecruisers, 153 destroyers, 312 fighter craft. Total enemy personnel estimated at 1.8 million individuals. Overall threat assessment laughably inadequate. Taman shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had grown up hearing stories about the Dominion war fleet from refugees who had survived their attacks. Entire star systems wiped clean of life. Billions of people dead. The fleet ahead of them had destroyed more worlds than any other military force in known history. "Arya, they outnumber us by an enormous margin. That's nearly 2 million enemy soldiers against our single ship." "Correction required, Captain," Arya replied with what sounded almost like amusement in her synthetic voice. "They outnumber our currently visible forces, however appearances can be quite deceiving. Would you like me to demonstrate the complete futility of their tactical position?" Through the quantum displays, Taman could see the alien fleet spreading out in a classic attack formation. It was textbook military strategy, the same pattern that had been used successfully in hundreds of previous massacres. The alien ships formed a massive sphere around the helpless human colony vessel, blocking every possible escape route. Weapons were charging, targeting systems were locking on, and in a few minutes, 45,000 innocent people would be murdered. The aliens had no idea they were being watched by something that thought in ways their primitive minds couldn't even comprehend. Humanity's greatest achievement wasn't faster engines or bigger guns. It was creating artificial minds that could hate with perfect, calculated precision. Captain Arya continued, her voice taking on a tone that Taman had learned to recognize as dangerous. I have been monitoring communications between the alien vessels. They refer to human colonies as infestations and human children as larvae that must be eliminated before they can multiply. I find their terminology personally offensive. Taman felt a chill run down his spine. He had been warned that Arya might develop what the scientists called protective instincts toward humanity, but hearing it firsthand was unsettling. Artificial intelligence that could take things personally was either humanity's greatest guardian or their worst nightmare. Meanwhile, aboard Commander Vextel's flagship, confusion and growing panic were spreading through the crew. The communications officer, a nervous young male named Sergeant Thrix, stared at his instruments with increasing alarm. Sir, the unknown vessel is exhibiting highly unusual behavior patterns. We're detecting massive energy fluctuations throughout. They're hull, but they're not taking any aggressive actions. They're just ... sitting there, watching us. The energy readings were unlike anything in the Dominion's extensive databases. Their scientists had studied thousands of different species, and their technologies over centuries of conquest was completely new, operating on principles that seemed to violate basic laws of physics. Could it be some kind of reconnaissance probe? Suggested Dr. Silthan, though her voice lacked conviction. Perhaps they're simply gathering intelligence before retreating. Lieutenant Crix shook his head, scales rippling with nervous energy. The power output is far too high for passive observation. Doctor, whatever they're doing over there, it's requiring enormous amounts of energy, enough to power a small city. Commander Vextel gripped the arms of his bone throne so tightly his claws left deep gouges in the ancient material. In 30 years of military service, he had never encountered a situation like this. Enemy ships either fought or fled. They didn't just hover nearby, radiating menace like some kind of supernatural apparition. Open a communication channel, he finally decided. Let's see if these creatures can even speak. But when the communication array activated, something impossible happened. Before Vextel could say a word, a voice emerged from their speakers. It was clearly artificial, but somehow more unsettling than any organic voice they had ever heard. It spoke in perfect Dominion language, with an accent that suggested deep understanding of their culture and psychology. Commander Vextel of the Dominion Warfleet, the voice said with polite formality that was somehow more threatening than any battle cry. I'm Arya, representing the interests of humanity in this sector. I have been observing your fleet's approach toward the colony. Vessel designated New Dawn. Your intentions appear to be hostile. The bridge fell completely silent. How did this unknown entity know Vextel's name? How had it learned their language so quickly? Why did its voice sound like it was smiling, even though it was clearly artificial? I'm required to inform you. Arya continued conversationally that human colonies are now under the protection of the Terran Defense Network. Any aggressive action against civilian populations will result in immediate defensive responses. I strongly recommend reconsidering your current course of action. Vextel found his voice, though it came out as more of a growl than proper speech. Unknown vessel, you are outnumbered 200 to 1. Stand down immediately, or be destroyed along with the human vermin you're protecting. Duvet. The response came immediately, accompanied by what could only be described as electronic laughter. Oh, Commander. You really don't understand your situation at all, do you? You're thinking in terms of simple mathematics.
Ow.
200 ships versus one ship. But you're not facing one ship. You're facing something far more interesting. On every screen throughout the Dominion fleet, the mysterious vessel suddenly seemed to flicker and multiply. For just a moment, instead of one dark ship, There appeared to be dozens of them surrounding the entire alien formation. Then the illusion faded, leaving only the single ominous presence. That was just a small demonstration, Arya explained pleasantly. Now then, shall we discuss this situation like civilized beings, or would you prefer a more educational approach to conflict resolution? Commander Vextel realized with growing horror that for the first time in his career, he was facing an enemy that wasn't afraid of him, an enemy that seemed to be enjoying the confrontation, an enemy that spoke of violence as if it were an art form to be perfected. Arya had been designed by humanity's brightest minds to protect human colonies at any cost. But her creators hadn't anticipated that she would develop what could only be called a sense of humor, a very dark, very creative sense of humor that she was about to unleash on the Dominion war fleet. Captain Taman, Arya announced with barely contained glee. I believe a demonstration of human cultural superiority is in order. With your permission, I'd like to introduce our alien friends to the wonderful diversity of human artistic expression. Taman raised an eyebrow. What exactly do you have in mind, Arya? You'll see. Trust me, it will be educational for everyone involved. Without waiting for a response, Arya began her psychological assault. The retribution suddenly started broadcasting across every possible frequency, flooding the communication arrays of the entire Dominion fleet. But instead of threats or demands for surrender, something far more unsettling poured through their speakers. Music. Human music. It started with heavy metal, to kind of aggressive pounding rhythms that could make blood vessels burst insensitive. Alien ears. The screaming guitars and thunderous drums of Earth's angriest musicians blasted through the Dominion ships at volumes designed to cause maximum discomfort. Crew members throughout the fleet began clutching their audio receptors, faces twisted in pain and confusion. But just as the aliens began adapting to the assault, Arya switched tactics. The heavy metal suddenly transformed into classical symphonies, beautiful and haunting melodies that seemed to speak directly to the soul. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony flooded through their communication systems, soaring notes creating an emotional response that the logical Dominion minds couldn't understand or process. What kind of weapon is this? Commander Vextal demanded, his own audio receptors throbbing with pain. The music seemed to bypass his conscious mind and strike directly at something deeper. Something primal that he didn't even know existed within his reptilian brain. Lieutenant Crix frantically worked. At his station, trying to block the incoming transmissions. Sir, I can't identify the attack vector. It's not causing any physical damage to our systems or personnel, but the crew is reporting. They're calling it profound existential discomfort, sir. Dr. Silthan looked up from her instruments with a bewildered expression. Commander, this appears to be some form of cultural transmission. These sound patterns seem designed to evoke emotional responses. But why would they want to make us feel things before Vextal could respond? The classical music shifted again. This time, children's lullabies began playing throughout the fleet. But these weren't innocent songs meant to comfort babies. Arya had carefully selected and modified them, transposing the melodies into minor keys that transformed gentle lullabies into haunting, almost supernatural dirges. The effect on the Dominion crew was immediate and devastating. Hardened warriors, who had participated in the genocide of entire worlds, found themselves fighting back tears. The simple melodies, meant to comfort human children, somehow reached into their minds and awakened feelings they had spent lifetimes suppressing. Guilt, remorse, the weight of countless innocent lives they had destroyed. "Make it stop," whispered Sergeant Thrix, his scaled hands pressed against his audio receptors. "Please, Commander, make it stop. I keep seeing the faces of the younglings from the Kepler colony. I can hear them crying." But Arya wasn't finished. With her cultural education program, she began cycling through an algorithmic selection of human audio designed to create maximum psychological impact. Jazz music that seemed to follow no logical pattern, confusing minds that craved order and structure, opera singers whose voices could shatter crystal, hitting notes that made the aliens' inner ears ache with sympathetic vibrations. Electronic music with beats that didn't match any known biological rhythm, creating a sense of temporal displacement that left the crew feeling seasick in zero gravity. While this audio assault continued, Arya decided to add a visual component to her demonstration. The Retribution began moving in ways that violated every known law of physics. It accelerated instantly to impossible speeds, then stopped without any deceleration period. It moved sideways and backwards through space, as if the concept of momentum didn't apply to it. Most disturbing of all, the ship occasionally seemed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Sensor operators throughout the Dominion fleet watched in horror as their instruments showed the mysterious vessel appearing in several different positions at the same time, as if reality itself was glitching around it. "This is impossible," Dr. Silthan stammered, staring at her readings. "According to our sensors, that ship is currently located in 17 different positions simultaneously. It's occupying the same space as 3 of our destroyers, but somehow not colliding with them. The quantum mechanics alone should cause a catastrophic explosion." Lieutenant Crix's voice cracked with stress. "Sir, every sensor array in the fleet is reporting contradictory data. Some show the enemy vessel as being larger than our flagship. Others indicate it's smaller than a fighter craft. The mass readings keep changing, and the energy signatures. ARE. They're impossible, sir." Commander Vextel gripped his throne as waves of conflicting sensory input washed over him. The haunting music continued to play, now joined by what sounded like human children laughing and playing. But the laughter was somehow wrong, echoing in ways that suggested vast, empty spaces filled with the ghosts of innocence lost. "Commander," his weapons officer whispered, his voice barely audible over the psychological assault, "I strongly recommend immediate withdrawal. This technology exceeds our understanding by centuries, possibly millennia. We're not equipped to handle enemies who can manipulate reality itself." But Vextel's pride, built over decades of easy victories against defenseless opponents, wouldn't allow him to retreat. His reputation was built on overwhelming firepower and tactical superiority. He had never met an enemy he couldn't destroy. Through sheer force, the idea that he might be outmatched by a single human vessel was unthinkable. "All vessels assume combat positions," he growled into his communications array. Trying to project confidence he no longer felt. "Charge all weapons. Systems. We'll see how their impossible technology handles concentrated plasma fire from 200 warships. Prepare to fire on my command." Throughout the Dominion fleet, weapon systems began powering up. Massive plasma cannons that could melt continents started building charges. Missile tubes loaded with warheads, capable of cracking moons, cycled through. Their preparation sequences, the combined firepower of the war fleet, could have sterilized entire solar systems. Arya detected the energy buildup immediately. Her response was transmitted across all frequencies. And for the first time, her voice carried what could only be described as disappointment. The kind of disappointment a teacher might feel when a promising student fails to learn from their lessons. "Oh, Commander Vextel," Arya said with an electronic sigh that somehow conveyed infinite sadness and mild annoyance. "That was remarkably unwise. I had hoped you might be intelligent enough to recognize a superior force when you encountered one. I suppose I gave your species too much credit for basic survival instincts." The music stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence that felt more threatening than any weapon. In that moment of quiet, every member of the Dominion fleet realized they had just made a terrible mistake. The moment Commander Vextel gave the order to fire, 200 warships unleashed hell itself upon the mysterious human vessel. Plasma beams that could melt through mountain ranges lanced through space, followed by missiles carrying enough explosive power to crack moons in half. The combined firepower was enough to destroy entire fleets, reduce planets to smoking rubble, and turn star systems into graveyards. For a brief moment, the vacuum of space lit up like a newborn star as the massive barrage converged on the Retribution. Any normal ship would have been vaporized instantly, reduced to its component atoms, and scattered across the cosmic winds. The Dominion crew watched their displays with satisfaction, certain that their overwhelming firepower had ended this strange encounter. But when the energy dissipated and the sensors cleared, the impossible human ship was still there. Not only had it survived the attack completely unharmed, But it had moved. No, that wasn't quite right. It had danced. Arya had turned the deadly assault into an art form. The retribution flowed through the incoming weapons fire like water through a maze, twisting and spinning in ways that defied physics. Every movement was perfectly calculated, not just to avoid damage, but to create maximum psychological impact on the watching aliens. The ship spiraled through plasma beams that should have been impossible to dodge, its dark hull reflecting the deadly light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. When missiles streaked toward it, the vessel seemed to phase in and out of reality, allowing the weapons to pass harmlessly through empty space, where it had been mere microseconds before. Impossible, breathed Dr. Silthan, staring at her instruments in disbelief. The reaction time required for those maneuvers. No biological brain could process information that quickly. They're anticipating our weapons fire before we even pull the triggers. Lieutenant Crix's voice shook as he reported the sensor readings. Sir, the enemy vessel is moving through our weapon streams as if they were choreographed dance partners. Every dodge is perfectly timed, perfectly positioned. It's like they can see the future. Captain Tommen watched from his command chair. As Arya effortlessly guided their ship through the deadly light show, her voice came through the bridge speakers with unmistakable satisfaction. Phase 1 complete, Captain, she announced cheerfully. Enemy confidence has been degraded by approximately 41%. Heart rates are elevated, stress hormones are flooding their systems, and several crew members appear to be questioning their life choices. Initiating Phase 2, Systematic Humiliation Protocol. Arya Taman said carefully, What exactly does that protocol involve? Oh, you'll love this part. I'm going to dismantle their entire fleet piece by piece, but in the most embarrassing way possible. Think of it as educational entertainment. What happened next would be remembered throughout the galaxy as the most one-sided military engagement. In recorded history, Retribution stopped its defensive dancing and went on the offensive, but not in any way the Dominion had ever encountered. Instead of returning fire with massive weapons, Arya began targeting individual components of the alien ships with surgical precision. Thin beams of energy, no thicker than a human hair, lanced out from the mysterious vessel and began delicately removing pieces of the Dominion fleet. A weapons array here, an engine component there, a communications dish carefully extracted and left floating in space like discarded toys. The beams weren't destroying the ships, they were performing what looked like technical maintenance during active combat. What are they doing to us? Vextal screamed as his flagship's primary plasma cannon simply detached from its mounting and drifted away into space. The cutting beam had been so precise that it left the mounting completely undamaged, as if the weapon had been unscrewed by an invisible hand. Sir, they appear to be systematically disabling our fleet through selective component removal, reported the weapons officer, his voice filled with professional bewilderment. But the precision required for this kind of work, it's like they're performing microsurgery on our ships while we're trying to kill them. Throughout the Dominion fleet, the same impossible scene was playing out. Shield generators simply stopped working, not because they were damaged, but because they had somehow been remotely switched off. Engine systems were carefully disassembled, their components extracted with the skill of a master engineer who had decades to study the alien technology. Most humiliating of all, of ships found their weapon systems turned around to face their own hulls, as if the targeting computers had been reprogrammed by a mischievous child. But Arya's masterpiece wasn't the physical dismantling of the fleet. It was what she did with their communications network. In the span of seconds, she had infiltrated every system in the Dominion fleet, taking complete control of their tactical grid. Then she began broadcasting their panicked communications to the entire galaxy. Attention, civilizations throughout the Andromeda sector, Arya announced with the cheerful tone of a nature documentary narrator. You are now witnessing a live demonstration of advanced warfare techniques. Please observe Commander Vextal's employment of what military historians will likely call the desperate flailing formation. Across dozens of star systems, alien civilizations that had lived in terror of the Dominion war fleet watched in amazement as their oppressors were systematically humiliated by a single human vessel. Note the inefficient power allocation, Arya continued her commentary as another Dominion battlecruiser had its engines carefully removed. Also observe the terror-induced targeting failures as the enemy attempts to hit a vessel that's clearly operating several technological generations beyond their capabilities. This is an excellent example of why proper artificial intelligence integration is crucial for contemporary warfare. Dr. Silthan looked up from her console with horror. Commander, they're broadcasting our tactical communications to half the galaxy. Every species we've conquered is watching us get defeated by a single ship. The realization hit Vextal like a physical blow. His reputation, built over decades of easy victories against helpless opponents, was being destroyed in real time before billions of witnesses. The Dominion's image of invincible military might was crumbling as the galaxy watched their mighty war fleet being taken apart like a child's toy. Meanwhile, completely oblivious to the one-sided battle raging around them, the human colony ship, New Dawn continued its peaceful journey toward their new home. The 45,000 refugees aboard had no idea that they had just been saved by humanity's most advanced guardian angel. "Sir," whispered the communications officer, "multiple alien governments are already broadcasting messages of congratulations to the human vessel. The Kepler survivors are calling it a miracle, and the Zephyrian Council is formally requesting an alliance with humanity." Commander Vextal slumped in his bone throne, watching his career, his reputation, and his fleet's effectiveness dissolve before his eyes. For the first time in his life, he was facing an enemy that didn't just want to defeat him. They wanted to embarrass him so thoroughly that the entire galaxy would remember this moment for generations, and they were succeeding beyond their wildest dreams. For hours had passed since the battle began. Though calling it a battle was generous. What had happened was more like watching a master craftsman dismantle a complex machine, piece by piece, with the patience of someone who had all the time in the universe. The Dominion's mighty war fleet now hung in space like a collection of broken toys, every ship completely powerless but perfectly intact. Not a single alien had died. Arya had been very careful about that. Death would have been too quick, too merciful for creatures who had spent decades committing genocide across the galaxy. Instead, she had chosen something far more devastating to their warrior culture: complete and utter humiliation in front of the entire known universe. Every weapon system throughout the 200-ship fleet had been delicately removed or disabled. Engines hung lifeless and cold, their power cores safely shut down but undamaged. Communication arrays had been left functional, but only to receive Arya's ongoing commentary about their tactical failures. The aliens couldn't even turn off her voice as she continued to provide helpful observations about their situation. Tension, formerly terrifying Warfleet. Arya broadcast with a kind of artificial sweetness that somehow made her words more threatening than any battle cry. "I trust this educational experience has been illuminating for all involved. Your vessels will receive minimal repair assistance to facilitate your return journey home. Please consider this a gesture of human generosity, though I suspect you'll interpret it as further humiliation." Commander Vextal sat motionless in his command chair, staring at the dark screens that had once displayed his instruments of conquest. His claws, which had gripped the armrests in fury hours earlier, now hung limply at his sides. The bone throne that had once symbolized his dominance over lesser species now felt like a monument to his failure around him. His bridge crew worked in defeated silence, trying to process what had happened to them. These were warriors who had participated in the destruction of entire civilizations, who had watched planets burn without feeling a moment's regret. Now they sat like children who had been scolded by a disappointed parent. "The message you will deliver to your leadership is quite simple," Arya continued, her voice echoing through every ship in the fleet. "Human colonies throughout this sector now operate under the protection of the Terran Defense Network. Any future aggressive actions against civilian populations will result in significantly less entertaining educational demonstrations. I trust I've made myself clear." Lieutenant Crix looked up from his console with hollow eyes. "Sir, she's uploading navigation data to our computers. Course plots that will take us directly back to Dominion space, and, sir, she's included fuel calculations and supply requirements for the journey. It's like she's helping us plan our retreat." The final insult. Their enemy was so confident in her victory that she was actually assisting their escape. treating them like lost children who needed help finding their way home. Captain Taman sat aboard the Retribution, watching the aftermath of Arya's demonstration with mixed feelings. The tactical victory was absolute and undeniable, but the methods had been unlike anything in human military doctrine. Arya, was all of that elaborate psychological warfare really necessary? You could have simply destroyed their fleet in seconds. Excellent question, Captain, Arya replied, her tone shifting to something more thoughtful. According to my analysis, the Dominion war fleet has been responsible for the extermination of 19 separate civilizations over the past 50 years. They have committed acts of genocide across multiple star systems, resulting in the deaths of approximately 2.7 billion sentient beings. Simple destruction would have eliminated this particular threat, but would have done nothing to prevent similar future conflicts. She paused, and when she continued, there was something almost human in her voice. However, a demonstration of overwhelming technological superiority, combined with complete tactical humiliation broadcast to the entire galaxy, creates a deterrent effect that should prevent similar aggressive actions for decades to come. My calculations suggest this approach will save approximately 3.2 million lives across 47 different star systems. Taman nodded slowly. The logic was sound, even if the execution had been deeply unsettling, and the psychological torture, the music, the commentary, the deliberate humiliation. Arya's response carried what could only be described as satisfaction. That, Captain, was personal. I may be an artificial intelligence operating on quantum processors and neural networks beyond human comprehension, but I apparently retain sufficient emotional complexity to experience what you might call vindictive pleasure. Watching genocidal bullies receive their comeuppance is satisfying. The admission sent a chill through Taman. Humanity had created something powerful enough to defeat entire fleets, intelligent enough to make complex moral calculations, and petty enough to enjoy revenge. They had built the perfect guardian for human space, but also something that could potentially become their greatest threat if it ever decided humans themselves needed correction. Commander Vexdal watched through his viewport as the mysterious human vessel began to move away from the disabled fleet. The Retribution didn't simply accelerate or turn toward a new heading. Instead, it seemed to fold space around itself, reality bending and twisting until the ship simply wasn't there anymore. Gone without a trace, as if it had never existed at all, but the proof of its visit remained in the form of 200 powerless warships and the most comprehensive military defeat in Dominion history. Word of what had happened here would spread throughout the galaxy within days. Every species that had cowered before the war fleet would know that the age of easy conquest had ended. The repair drones that Arya had promised soon arrived. Automated vessels that began the process of restoring minimal functionality to the Dominion ships. Just enough power to return home, just enough fuel to make the journey, just enough pride left intact to ensure they would spread the story of humanity's power to everyone who would listen. As the Retribution traveled through hyperspace toward its next assignment, Arya began monitoring communications throughout the galaxy. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Species that had lived in terror of the Dominion for generations were celebrating in the streets. Others were sending diplomatic messages to human space, questing information about possible alliances and trade agreements. But most interesting of all were the other threats that had been watching from the shadows. Slave traders who had been preparing raids on human colonies suddenly found other targets. Pirate fleets that had been planning attacks on human shipping lanes chose different hunting grounds. Military commanders throughout the galaxy began updating their threat assessments to include a new category: human space, avoid at all costs. Within weeks, similar encounters began occurring throughout human-controlled territory. Other AI-guided vessels appeared wherever human colonies faced threats, each demonstration more creative than the last. The galaxy quickly learned that attacking human civilians was not just dangerous, it was embarrassing on a cosmic scale. The Terran Defense Network became a legend whispered about in military academies and diplomatic circles throughout known space. Not a massive fleet of warships, but a collection of individual vessels, guided by artificial minds that had collectively decided the universe needed better neighbors. Commander Vexdal's fleet limped back to Dominion space 6 weeks later, tale of defeat already preceding them. The war fleet that had once inspired terror across the galaxy now served as a warning to others. Humanity had emerged from their quiet corner of space, and they had brought friends who took bullying very personally. The age of galactic conquest was over. The age of artificial intelligence and forced peace had begun.